2018 was a great year for video games. Some of the top games of that year, as listed by nearly every gaming publication out there, included God of War's Nordic reboot, the long-awaited Red Dead Redemption 2, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Celeste, among many fantastic other titles from both AAA and indie developers. And I've noticed as of writing this episode that I've coincidentally made videos on almost all of those titles I just named. But there was another game that I kept hearing about over and over again from friends of mine who rarely even touch new games, but for some reason could not stop talking about it. And that game is Marvel's Spider-Man. Now, we've had great superhero games in the past. There have even been some notably enjoyable Spider-Man games before. But up against franchise skyscrapers like that of Red Dead, God of War, and Assassin's Creed, how could a standalone comic book hero game possibly compare in such a competitive climate? Well, I'll let you know right now that this may have been the easiest analysis I've ever made. From the moment I turned on this game, fantastic features of all kinds started popping out, making themselves abundantly apparent, and demonstrating how great this game really is, and I'm glad I've finally gotten around to playing it. But let me provide you with a few examples as to why this title should definitely not fly under your radar, as we establish what's so great about Spider-Man 2018. This game doesn't start with an origin story, because most of us, I imagine, at least have a vague idea of who Spider-Man is, and how he got his powers. But we don't want to learn about Spider-Man, we want to be Spider-Man. Lately, in the realm of superhero-related media, fans have gotten tired of seeing the same origin stories 50 ways to Sunday by different directors who all think they've finally got the best version of watching Bruce Wayne's parents get mugged in an alley. So you know what's better than that? Introducing the character in the context of who they are and what they do. That's what we get with the assault on Fisk's business in the prologue. This first villain is obviously meant to be inclusive for fans beyond video games or die-hard Spider-Man include the hyphen fanatics. Using a relatively known Marvel villain like Kingpin, and obviously presenting him in the same style we may have seen him in the Daredevil Netflix series, for instance, draws players of all kinds into this new story by giving them an early opportunity to go, hey, I've heard of him, instead of starting the players off against nameless goons or an unknown original character. The story utilizes the characters and villains that we're aware of, but who have not often taken the center stage, with side missions from Black Cat and Taskmaster, and more story-heavy character appearances from Norman Osborn and Dr. Octavius. However, it avoids enemies that we may have seen too frequently in the Spider-Man universe, like Green Goblin and Venom. There are even some enjoyable jabs at the lesser-known villains, such as the experience with Shocker, where Peter says, "You have no personality, but your suit sure looks cool," playing into the fourth wall as some of the more comedic comic book heroes like Spidey are known to do. One of the enjoyable aspects of Spider-Man as a character is the reality of Peter Parker juggling his many lives, and this game capitalizes well on that aspect, in the integration of different character arcs and mission types. Between his partnership with MJ, lab work with Doc, and volunteer work at Aunt May's Feast Center, Peter has a lot going on, and it's fun to see those cell phone calls come in and out as he's battling thugs and villains throughout the streets of New York. Not to mention the excellent writing of the consistently on-again, off-again relationship between Peter and MJ. Their dynamic relationship is so well structured from both sides, not just as part of the video game, but also in its own story. It's sweet and it's tense, and it adds a nice side plot to the game that has nothing to do with all the action. And what's even better is that you find yourself rooting for them both as characters. They didn't just make MJ a vessel for Peter's personal interests, like a background character with cameo appearances. Let me tell you, as someone who's by no means a comic book or superhero fan, I was very excited to see who showed up in terms of characters I did and didn't know. I have friends that could probably tell you which versions of Spider-Man wore which suit and fought whichever villain in so-and-so media, and they may have been thrilled to see those characters they love so much, and to know what big plot points may be heading their way from the clues sprinkled around this game's world. However, I'd be willing to bet from my own outsider point of view that my experience was just as thrilling, if not even more so, having no expectations of any twists or turns that may head my way as I went into this game, because there's no way I could have known all of those different possible adaptations of the Spider-Man universe, and which plotlines which characters follow. The progression of the story was incredibly original to me as an outsider to the comic book world, and I think that demonstrates very well the wide-reaching enjoyability of this game's story as well as its source material. At first I imagined the combat of this game would be almost identical to the combat in the Batman Arkham series, and while it's comparable, it's not identical. In fact, it's a lot more free-flowing. It throws quite a bit of information your way all at once, telling you about more than enough options than you need, when most third-party action games just tell you to mash the action button until it's all over. But instead, this game runs all the options by you real quick, and then, once you're left to your own devices, the action flows seamlessly through itself, with whichever choices you make in terms of button presses becoming the next logical progression of Spider-Man's movements. Depending on what you do in the middle of a fight, Spider-Man will immediately and seamlessly integrate the surroundings into his combat, whipping around trash cans and jumping off of walls. If you want to just button mash your way through combat portions, that's an option, and if you plan on accurately activating your abilities for the perfect combo, that's an option too. Old school combat combos are posted in the moves list section of your menu, so you don't have to refer back to the tutorial or a confusing controller layout screen if you want to start incorporating some more fanciful footwork back into your combat routine. Boss battles, however, are much more dependent on speed and accuracy of button presses without resorting to QuickTime effects to make things feel pressured. Sure, QuickTime events do exist in the game, but they're hardly a noticeable part of the experience. Trust me, I can't stand how QuickTime events ruin the flow of so many games, or make a trivial moment agonizing, but they were integrated very well into this title. Sure, the combat is important for any superhero-based video game, but luckily, Insomniac didn't put all of their eggs in that basket, and allowed for a few more options in terms of interesting gameplay to break up the pace along the way. Part of what makes Spider-Man amazing is that he's smart. Sure, he gets some of his powers from that radioactive bite, but in the traditional versions of Spider-Man, he invents his own web slingers, among other capabilities that he's known for. This intellect is brought into the gameplay in terms of hacking radio towers and repairing circuit boards. They're simple puzzles, but the scientific manner in which they're presented makes you feel smarter too. In terms of accessibility though, you can also enable skippable puzzles if those circuit boards are giving you trouble, or just not an interesting aspect of gameplay to you, as well as setting those few aforementioned QuickTime events to autocomplete if you're not a fan. There is one big feature of Spider-Man's arsenal that he's probably most known for, and that's all the web slinging. So let's talk about how we're going to get around this impressively faithful adaptation of Manhattan. Despite the size of the map, moving around this game's world is fun even without the use of fast travel. Most of the time, if a game were to tell you your objective is on the other side of the map, you'd probably begrudgingly head towards whatever route will get you there fastest, and hopefully one that just skips the trip altogether. But in Marvel's Spider-Man, there's really no reason not to hop into the air and swing across Manhattan yourself. The immediate increase in velocity as you start swinging is incredibly satisfying. There's no significant build-up that can be easily interrupted by a building in your way or lack of a grapple point. As long as you at least look where you're going, there won't really even be a reason for you to touch the ground. Even if you fall on those early tutorial thwips, the game guides you through the process of being a superhero, running up buildings until you get a moment to travel in a super fashion again. Once you really get the hang of the controls, you'll be swinging around corners and vaulting over building tops in no time. You would think that traveling at super speeds between giant buildings, being able to stick to any surface, and travel in multiple directions, including upside down, might all become a little clunky to control well, but I never experienced any real hiccups throughout my entire play, and anytime Spider-Man did seem to lose a little sense of direction, it really only affected my speed of movement. It's not as though it ruined my positioning altogether. While you're freely exploring the city, there will be bright glowing beacons and icons of specific colors for various side quests and city activities. But once you're focused in on a specific pursuit, whether it be a main quest, taking on a Fisk hideout, or helping out Harry's research labs, these beacons all go away so that they don't clutter up your screen as you focus on one objective at a time. Even when the game tells you to pass the time before your next main storyline objective, you never feel things slowing down. It doesn't mean, go complete a bunch of side stuff to unlock your next main mission. It really does mean, hey, give us a second, relax with this game however you see fit, and we'll get a hold of you with your next objective soon. Then, there you go, it pops up on your map, a big yellow waypoint to stand out from everything else, so you know at any point when you're done exploring, you can just swing in that general direction and continue to the story. Otherwise, you could just spend your time jumping from map marker to map marker in your immediate vicinity, and it would be incredibly difficult for you to run out of things to do. I would just jump around to whatever marker was closest to me, from radio beacon to backpack to armed robbery, and each one would lead me closer to new objectives and collectibles. The fun literally leads you towards more fun. I know this game came out in 2018, and video game visuals are nothing to sneeze at these days, but I tell you, some of these cutscenes look like scenes from a movie, and I didn't even have the luxury of playing this game in its full 4K resolution. The exclusion of using our current Spider-Man actor, Tom Holland, avoids a little bit of extra aging this game could go through in the future. At that point, the game would feel too based on the blockbuster movie to really reach the masses of players for years to come. But don't worry, the Peter Parker that stars in this adaptation is portrayed by seasoned voice actor Yuri Lowenthal, who is only one of the many fantastic actors who lent their voices to this project in order to make it a grade A experience. This has been a frequently made point to the attention to detail this game possesses, but in case you aren't aware yet, every line of dialogue that Peter has outside of cutscenes was recorded in two ways. One where he is relaxed, and one during which he is exerting himself, so that the attitude and delivery of the dialogue matches the actions on screen. The use of phone calls to progress through minor aspects of the story helps the momentum greatly, saving time out of cutscenes you may have to sit through, but still adding depth to the adventure you're deep in the middle of. Although, for added player preference, you can even unsubscribe from certain atmospheric pop-ups like the J. Jonah Jameson radio outbursts. Something that I really appreciated about this game is how well it keeps the flow going, and how you can do whatever you want for a bit, choose your own missions, and even turn off the game for a while without having to worry about the pacing whenever you wanted to get back into the action. For instance, anytime you boot up the game, Spider-Man will say something relating to what mission you were most recently focusing on. Then you can look around the city in silence for a moment, perch atop a building, and as soon as you're ready and start swinging, that signature heroic music will kick back in and you're right back in the action. It feels as though Insomniac took a page from their old sci-fi roots from the Ratchet & Clank days, in terms of the gadgets and progressions through unlockables. In terms of customizability and player freedom, upgrades even tell you what type of side missions and city activities need to be completed in order to unlock or craft them. Just so you don't go collecting every backpack in New York before realizing that whole time you should have been stopping robberies. Or if there's specific types of side missions you don't have any interest in, then you can just do the minimum necessary amount of them in order to get those upgrades you want and continue on with your favorite objectives. Working in a known universe can be a tricky feat, but I think this game provides a great experience for both those who consider themselves part of the Spider-Man or Marvel fan base, as well as any players that consider themselves outsiders to that realm. The walls of every room feel like they're littered with flavor text of the Marvel Universe, whether that means visually or through character interaction. Of course, as with any great game or movie based on comics, there are tons of fan-serving references and in-jokes, sprinkling enjoyable tidbits for the die-hard superhero fans. This game's also full of that great comedic banter that we've come to enjoy from Marvel characters these days. This game probably came out at just the right time with all things considered in its own source and parallel media. The Spider-Man movies are bigger than ever with the growth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's been long enough since the last thoroughly enjoyed Spider-Man game back on PS2 and GameCube that we can now really appreciate the lengths that video game development has come to in terms of physics, dynamic lighting, world size, and cinematic movement. This game showcases all of those aspects incredibly in a powerful little package that will remain a staple of the current climate of gaming for years to come, and that is what's so great about Spider-Man 2018. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming as we swung through the amazing world of Spider-Man. Make sure you tell us what you think about Spider-Man, or even suggest a game for another video. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Super Metroid, on screen or in the description, and please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions here. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.